Wow, bravo. That was amazing, Mike.
Well,
And
thank
thank you.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining Forging Manufacturing. I appreciate your time so much.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, man.
Yeah. And, so I guess, this is a little different than maybe some of our listeners who are generally manufacturers
Mhm.
are wondering, all right, so we opened up with Mike Rayburn playing the guitar. And what does this have to do with manufacturing and getting better, right?
Yes. And my quick answer would be it has everything to do with manufacturing and getting better, because the key there is what I did with the guitar. I want audiences, your listeners, to apply as a metaphor for what they do. Meaning, I want them to look at it differently. I was playing the guitar a little differently than it's been played for the last 500 years. And so I believe that there are always new ways to look at anything. And so, hopefully we'll end up talking about some of the tools to do that. But just as a general point, I want people to look at what you do every single day, to try to stand outside of it, to look at it in a different way, to look at it. And again, this is not change for the sake of change, but it's change for the sake of improvement.
Yeah.
And I got to
Yeah.
say, I saw you a couple of years ago. I was fortunate enough to see you at an event. It really had an impact on my life, both professionally and personally. I think I've told you that before, and it's something I try not only to incorporate in my life, but I try to teach it into my children's life, into my customers' life. Your message is just rock solid. I love it. So really, really happy you're here today.
Well, thank you. And it makes me feel good, because one of the things I do say in each presentation is, I don't want you to just use this for yourself, but I want you to inspire it in others. And you're doing exactly that. So, man, awesome. That makes me, my work here is done.
Not quite yet.
No.
But, so if you could, I mean, I gave a bit of a bio to kick off, but could you just give us a little bit of a background, like kind of how you ended up here and just kind of what inspired the what if, and then we can get into the what if and what'll really pertain to the rest of the audience.
Right. So for years, I was a guitarist and comedian. I played colleges. I played comedy clubs. I was a songwriter in Nashville. I was signed to Sony Music Publishing. And at the same time growing up, I had learned to play guitar. In 11th grade, my father gave me a book called Psycho-Cybernetics, which is by a guy named Maxwell Maltz. And it's about the power of the mind, the power of mindset, the power of belief to change reality, or to shape reality is probably a better word. And so while I'm being an artist, I still had all these personal development, mindset, goal setting ideas going. And I would go to talks by different presenters who would talk about similar points, visualization and things like that. And so it was never off in Weirdsville, but it was just life skills, life stuff they don't teach you in college. In most colleges, I actually know one who does. But anyway, so along about I was about 20 years ago. I was at a turning point in my career, and I realized that if I created a keynote presentation, which you guys are talking about, I could create a keynote presentation teaching possibility thinking, teaching mindset, teaching ways to not just manage change, which most of us do, but to create change, to lead the way, right? I could share these tools, and instead of most presenters who use, PowerPoint and statistics, I could use guitar and comedy as my delivery mechanism. So instead of focusing completely on guitar and comedy, I was focusing on sharing a message, and I was using the guitar and comedy as delivery. And luckily, I was just guessing, and it hit a niche. And so it kind of took off, and I've been able to grow with that since then.
Certainly has. And I was also at the same presentation with Jason years ago, and it has resonated and really shaped a big piece of my life as well. And so again, our audience being manufacturers, and at the end of the day, we're businesses made up of people, right, that are trying to get better. I don't care if you're a manufacturer, an architect, construction company, insurance firm. At the end of the day, you want to grow, you want to get better, you want to improve your processes. What, from your perspective, what holds people and businesses back? If you could point to a couple things, and maybe we can get into it from here.
What holds people back? Usually it comes down to individuals, I think it's the collective individual beliefs that shape the culture of an organization. And so, when an individual, we each have limiting beliefs. We have beliefs, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough experience. I've never been good at that kind of thing. We have limiting beliefs going on. And when any one of us has some of those, collectively, if we're not doing something intentional to change those or intentional to respond to those, then that causes us to seek a comfort zone. And so once we get, this is where success breeds complacency sometimes, where it's successful. We got something that's working and we have these beliefs that are going on subconsciously. And so when the opportunity to try something different, even though whatever's working is working, to try something different, we go, well, no, if it ain't, the old phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Well, here's the challenge with that. Time breaks everything. So if it's working now, it likely will not be later. So if we're not the ones, so there's this desire to stay in our comfort zone as an organization, as an individual, as one team, as part of the organization. That desire to stay in the comfort zone is what keeps us from moving forward. The one other point I would share is that I deliver a second keynote presentation called Become a Virtuoso. And what I exhort people to do is to make the choice to become their personal best, to become a virtuoso. No one becomes great without choosing to do so. No one gets better without choosing to do so. And so absent that choice, we kind of stay where we are, or we might improve a little with just because it's the flow of things in an organization, but we don't improve nearly as much as we could if we make that decision first and then act on it. So what I try to get groups to do is to collectively make each one of them individually, but as a group, to make the choice to become their personal best, the best they can possibly be. Because most of us, even when we improve, we stop at acceptable, good enough, okay, getting by, what's required, instead of moving past that. So I think that those limiting beliefs, not having made the decision to become your personal best, and then the desire to stay in one's comfort zone, those are at least part of what holds organizations back.
You mentioned a couple things. I think it's great. Time kills, or time breaks everything eventually. And even if a manufacturer is running smoothly, they're getting the product out they want, if they wait long enough, their competition actually is going to start outpacing them and taking some of that revenue away from them. But you did mention something prior to, which was in one of your reels, was managing change is basically folly. You need to create change. I'd like to, if you could, expand a little bit further on that. I love that point.
Sure. Well, my presentation, as you can see from right here, is called the What If Keynote Experience. And I just call it that because the question, what if, which everybody's heard, I know, but I invite people to revisit it, always opens up possibilities. And so when I've presented for major corporations, which we would all know, who have programs, entire programs, their whole book and online portals and everything on managing change. And Peter Drucker said it, managing change is not only stupid, it's dangerous. The only way to manage change is to create change. Now, if you look at something like, because we talked about time breaks everything. If you look at something, and this is a classic example, so I know it's kind of cliche at this point, but you talked about people, something's running okay as a manufacturer. Well, let's look at taxis. Taxis were running fine as an organization until Uber came along. And Uber and Lyft have taken a great portion of their business, I mean, crazy market share. And so that's because they had something that was working and time broke it. Because time means what, technology came along and somebody said, now Uber, the largest transportation company in the world, doesn't own a vehicle. That's crazy. Okay. So this is why we need to, instead of being an organization who either manages change that's coming at them or simply just keeps doing the things that they're doing that work, needs to have some component, a person, a team, a mindset of the organization, which is looking ahead, which is always looking for a new way to do things, a way to improve. Again, going back to that virtuoso decision, making the choice to become the best. That means looking at what's going on in the industry, looking at what's going on outside the industry. Almost every disruption to an industry comes from outside that industry. It's someone else who looked differently. I just came from High Point University. High Point, and I played there when I played colleges when it was described as a dusty old private school in the South. And then a guy named Dr. Nito Cubain came along, and he's my friend and mentor, and extraordinarily successful businessman. He owned Great Harvest Bread Company. He's on the board of BB&T Bank and Lazy Boy and all these. He's very successful. And he came into it not as an academician, not as a dean, not as a teacher even, at least in a formal sense. He came in as a businessman. And he said, what do we need to do let's re-examine the outcome. The outcome is students who are ready to enter the workforce and take over. Students who are ready to meet the world as it's going to be, not as it is. And so he said, what do we have to do that? And he changed everything. And that whole school has been disrupted. And now it's having an effect all throughout higher education in the US, just from High Point. And it's because somebody outside the industry did that. So I want your people listening now to have some component where we're looking ahead. We're looking at what technology is doing. We're looking at what other sometimes disparate, maybe unrelated organizations or thinkers or entrepreneurs are doing to see how we can possibly do something better.
Well said. And, just a quick plug for those that are just listening and not seeing the video and the screen behind you. I really recommend going to MikeRayburn.com. That's www.mike, M-I-K-E, Rayburn, RAYBURN.com. And, there's so much, there's a lot of tools up on your website. And, you've got the What If book, you've got the DVD, you've got, opportunities to interact and different, many different ways, pretty much every medium, especially now that virtual is, well, for the last 2 years, it's pretty much been the standard.
Yes.
So many ways to interact. Wondering, can you share a tool or two just to help inspire our audience to figure out how to get started or just something to, like, everybody needs that jumping off point. And you've spoken to the mindset a little bit, but is there a little bit more that you can give the audience to help, like, give them a kickstart?
Give a kickstart towards achieving the what if or finding what that what if may be, because again, that what if could be anything, for our audience, and it could be personal, it could be the business. Yeah. First of all, let's talk about problem solving, and then we'll talk about possibilities. I use the question what if for radical problem solving. And so when there's a problem, let me give you an example of how this was done, and you'll see how it can be applied when there's a problem. There's an organization I presented for called Orscheln. Orscheln is in the Midwest. They own about 170 farm and home retail stores. It's like a farm version of Home Depot. And I presented for all their managers of all their stores in February of 2019. 2 months later, March of 2019, March or April, there were devastating floods throughout Nebraska. The store in Seward, Nebraska is managed by a guy named Evan Couch. Evan and his team show up at 6:30 in the morning. They're opening at 8, and they find, first of all but one section of the parking lot are completely underwater and frozen. It's Nebraska. The store had 2 inches of flood water throughout the entire store. It had receded, but you've seen what floods leave, a muddy mess everywhere. There was no way they're going to open that day. There's no way, probably not the next day. And the challenge wasn't just that they're losing the revenue of a day or two's business, but the community was depending on the products they sell for them to clean up and to dig out and to fix things, right? So his team's all just assessing the damage, assessing the situation, and obviously they are burdened with problems. So think about that as a metaphor for wherever your listeners are right now. Think about that problem where everyone sees what the problem is, right? So he gathered the team together, and he did this exactly as I teach it. He gathered them together and he said, okay, guys, this is crazy. what if we had to open today by 8 a.m.? How would we do it? Pause the story. What that did was it got everyone's focus from scarcity and problem to abundance and solution. You've got, every one of you has team members who have extraordinary abilities if you'll just tap into them. The question, what if, is a great way to do it. Pose a question to them. Those people will answer, they'll go to work. Your brain does the same thing for you. So he said, well, what if we had to? How would we do it? Well, they started brainstorming. Here's what they did. They posted somebody at the front of the parking lot to direct traffic to the one place they could park. There was no way they were going to clean that store up in an hour, but they could clean the front area near the registers. So they brought customers in. They brought a few extra employees in with boots who would take the customer's order, almost like a fast food place, walk through the store, gather up the products they need. It's kind of like when you go to an auto parts store. They don't let you go back through the thing. They go back and get it. So they got all the products. They bring it up to the cash register, ring them up, and they're on their way. They opened at 8 a.m. They had a full day of sales. And not only did it have a full day of sales, but they built a new bond with the community because they saw them all just going out of their way to serve. So that's a very practical way when there's a problem and everyone is looking at the problem, and you do need to assess the problem. I'm not saying that's wrong, but at some point it's important to get everyone to say, okay, what if we could do this? What if we had to do this? What if, look at the numbers you're trying to create and just ask the question, what if we had to create this? What would we do with it? Okay, so that's a very practical way to use the question, what if, in a very real situation. Does that make sense? So, yeah. So I'd also say, as far as looking to the future, I start to dream a little bit. I start to imagine what I do in a larger context. So I want people, I've had a number of different successes, and I don't want to sit here and tell my own accolades, but to share this from college, I had a dream of playing Carnegie Hall. I always wanted to play Carnegie Hall. I studied classical guitar in college and music business, and a student who had been at my college had gone there and played one song as part of a larger event, and they did an article about him, and I was like, wow, Carnegie Hall, that's like, it's the brass ring for a musician. And I had that goal, and it's something that seemed impossible. So the way I refer to this is writing music that you can't play. I want your people, in a very practical way, to set at least one goal, depending on the time frame, if it's 6 months or if it's 6 years, I don't know. But within the context of the time frame, set one goal where, when you come up with the goal, don't start with what's possible. Forget that. Start with what's cool, what's right, what's the dream case, right? People say, in a perfect world, I would. Yes, in a perfect world, you would what? And why is that not the goal? And then they say, oh, well, it's because it's impossible, and we kill it, right? So what I want you to say, well, come up with this goal. And here's the test to know in a practical way whether you have the goal I'm talking about or not. It takes courage to think it. The kind of goal that completes this phrase. Okay, this is nuts, but I'm gonna. What is it that's nuts, but you're gonna do it anyway? So practically, there's 3 things you got to do with it. I've studied every goal setting program on the planet, and you boil it down, it comes down to this. Number 1, you got to write it down. Can't just think about it. Number 2, you got to commit to it. Get your heart in there. This is going to happen. Commitment. And number 3, you got to take physical action on it within 24 hours of writing it down, preferably right away, but at least within 24 hours. And if you'll do this, the coolest thing will happen. The universe will come to your aid. I personally call it God. You can call it whatever you want to call it. It's like the universe likes goals like this. And in fact, I've heard it in the more spiritual context. I've heard it say, if you're setting goals that you know how to achieve, it's kind of an insult to God. Give God a chance to be God, So anyway, so I did that. I set that with Carnegie Hall, and for decades, I just learned the skills. And then in a strange way, I won't go into the whole story, an opportunity came out, and all of a sudden I got to play at Carnegie Hall. I ended up playing there 8 times. I recorded a Live at Carnegie Hall CD. That's on the website as well. And so, so I invite you to think beyond where you are now, to think beyond and above, not just lateral, sideways. We're all moving up. And to think, what if we could do this? And detach yourself from the outcome. That's what usually, we filter everything through this, is it possible filter before we write it down. And don't filter it. Get rid of that filter for a moment. Just dream. You're not committed to it. Just write it down. Write down crazy stuff. I do this all the time, and it works. And I'll even go on record. Right now, I did this one time. I set a goal to perform a keynote, a duet of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, 2 guitars playing the whole dun 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 symphony, just with 2 guitars, and I would play both of them, with one of them being my hologram. And so you can look on my website. I did it in 2014. I'm the first person to ever do that. And so now my goal, I'm telling you right now, is to be able to do that in every show. I don't know how yet. I have no idea how, to be able to do 3D on stage so that somebody sitting in the audience like you guys would see this thing. So anyway, does that make sense?
It does. It's probably easier to do that in Las Vegas, Mike. They've got all the fun toys there. Interestingly,
that's not where I found the company to do it.
Oh, really?
The first one. Yeah. I found them in Santa Monica.
You kind of just blew my mind a little bit, because I just remembered as you were telling that story, the 3-step process. It was a mid-year meeting for Dave and I was sitting at 25% of my quota, and I half laughed and wrote down I was going to make Diamond Club. Wrote it down, didn't really put my heart into it, but had that thought because I did write it down, and I did make Diamond Club that year. So that kind of blew my mind when you told that story.
Oh.
I forgot all about it.
Okay,
pretty good.
I'm writing that down.
It's pretty wild.
Okay, can I use that? Can I tell people?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
I can share with you. I think it's over hundreds of stories of people who've written to me with similar goals, similar things they've done. An out of work pianist, and she's married. She has a kid who's 18 months old. She just got fired from the UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, music department, and the Las Vegas Opera. And she joined my Virtuoso program, and which I'll tell you about later if you want. But she joined that I call it the Virtuoso system. It's just a system to follow to do exactly what you talked about. And she said she wanted to tour the world. She wanted to study on a world-class level and tour the world as a world-class pianist. And I'm like the believer in the dream. And I'm thinking to myself, that's pretty optimistic. Okay. So we set the goal. We did the process. I was typing up, I have a TED talk on this called Become a Life Virtuoso. And I was literally typing the TED talk when her email came in, freaking out. She'd been accepted to the Mannes School of Music, the New England Conservatory, chosen to Juilliard Professional Studies, one of 3 out of 2,000 who applied. And she ended up graduating from Juilliard. She toured the world as the accompanist for a cellist by the name of Kari Joyner. And now she is a professor at Juilliard. Awesome. And she was out of work when she first did this. So it freaking works.
It does work. And I saw a picture the other day of all the Ford trucks sitting on this huge lot. And I was thinking about this podcast and your what if concept. And I think back, it wouldn't be a 2021 podcast if we didn't talk a little bit about COVID. But prior to COVID, nobody at Ford, maybe they did, but this is an example, nobody at Ford could have imagined that there'd be a chip shortage today, right? And so I also think that you could use this what if for planning for the future, right? Yeah. Even if you haven't seen the concepts yet, well, what if we could no longer get our supplies from overseas? What would we do? And that's, to me, is a pretty powerful point too.
Thank you for saying that. That is such a great point. And it brings up the criticism I've gotten for my presentation. And I'll just be vulnerable and open the curtains here. People you often use the what if question in a negative way. Like they refer to the what ifs. What if this bad thing happens? What if this bad thing happens? What if I'm not good enough to do this? And what I say is, if you'll simply detach the worry and fear from that, it's a very useful tool to say, what if this bad thing happens? What am I going to do about it? What if this bad thing happens? What am I going to do about it? I know a guy, speaking of COVID, I know his wife. I met him, shook his hand, but I know his wife. And as COVID hit and the lockdown began in March of 2020, and we were all headed to Walmart and wherever else we could find toilet paper, and everybody's going crazy. They were fine. And the reason is her husband, not like a prepper, like, doomsday kind of scenario, but he was just smart. He just thought, what if something happens that we can't get basic supplies? And he basically stored them up. So he had food, basic necessities, toilet paper, water, those kind of things, generator. And he keeps those now. Anyway, he just said, what if? A lot of people look at that and go, oh, he's just living in fear. No, actually, he's doing some pretty accurate risk assessment, risk possibilities. So just get rid of the negative side of it. Just get rid of the, oh no, what if this is bad? And just using it as something that brings you down. Entertain that question. What are you going to do about it?
Yep. Absolutely. No, I think that really does resonate to everybody, in manufacturing, because anything that's kind of a linear process, or you think of the assembly line, you think of anything that's that well-oiled machine, planning for the potential,
Yes.
Planning for the future is critical, because again, these are people's lives, businesses, many things are disrupted. Think
about it this way. We all, I've met one of the guys who does this. And he ended up being on TV about it. The TSA, or Homeland Security, hires people to try to get weapons through security, hires people to try to break their systems. Okay. They're identifying risks. They're looking for how could someone, if someone wanted to, and they're letting them brainstorm on their own and just try, do whatever. See if you could get this inch, if you could do that. Well, we don't have to do that just in a life or death situation like that would be. In your basic processes. What if this goes down? What if that goes down? What if this person doesn't show up? What if I get this many people? There was a good scenario where a friend of mine went into an organization and was talking with him, and he said, well, what if all the knowledge of the salespeople, he had a huge sales force who really knew they needed to be, to sell whatever this business was, they needed to be very, almost engineers, technical, right? And he said, well, what if all your people disappeared and you didn't have that knowledge? And they're all like, well, we don't have to worry about that because we got so many. And then he said, well, let me show you the stats. 85% of them are retiring in the next 3 years. What are you doing about getting their knowledge? Good thing to identify before they all go on, right? That's going on everywhere. This is the power of the question, what if?
One of my goals when I work with my customers is to sort of optimize their factory floor. And so I always try to challenge them to use the question, what if? What if we could increase our throughput by 30%? There's another tagline that goes along with your story of what if. It's why not? Mm-hmm. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because that's my next question to them, right? What if you increase, let's just say increase 30%, what's holding you back, or why not? Why can't you do that?
Yeah.
And that identifies some things. If you could talk briefly about that.
Sure. That identifies what's standing in the way. Everything is an obstacle, because I see us all as when we're standing here in this conversation, whoever's listening to this right now, you're at a certain spot and you have goals. And again, they're not horizontal, they're up. And so you're going to start moving. And first of all, there will be problems. We all know that. Just if anybody's not aware of that yet, I don't know what you're doing. And so the question is how we're going to look at them. And if we're going to look at them as things that, oh crap, it's holding me back. Wrong answer. It's there because when we're standing right where we are right now, as we're listening to this and sharing this, we're not good enough to be where that is. And so those obstacles are there to give us the ability, strength, knowledge, whatever it takes to be at that higher spot. And so it's kind of the rite of passage to look at stumbling blocks as stepping stones. So looking at, I always talk about it this way, looking at what's holding you back, what's in the way of doing this. that's always an accurate question at the beginning of a plan and in throughout, but at the beginning of a project plan, an initiative that you've got, to say, why aren't we there now? What are the things? Our people aren't skilled enough. They need to learn this technology. We haven't implemented this technology. We're having a shortage of qualified help applying for jobs. Whatever those things, looking at what holds you back from it is equally important and integral to looking at how we're going to get there. And there's when I always talk about something, when you have a project, I'll use the hologram for instance, but use this as a metaphor for having a big project. There are a series of steps. You start at the beginning of it. You say, what are we going to have to do this, to make this? And you'll come up with all the steps. And then ultimately you'll put them in some kind of a chronological order. There's always one step in a process that I call the limiting step. There's always one step which defines whether you'll do it or how fast you'll do it. And the others might not be that way. For me, when I created a keynote presentation that's going to conclude using a hologram of myself and a duet of Beethoven's symphony, I had to write the keynote. I had to do the arrangement of Beethoven. There's not an arrangement of a duet, so I had to write one. I had to find a company to do the hologram. I had to shoot the hologram. I had to write the conversation that I have with myself. I had to put it all together. I had to make sure the hotel had rigging. I had all these different points. The limiting step was finding a company to create the hologram affordably. Because if I couldn't do that, even if I did everything else, it wouldn't happen. There's always one step. So ask yourself, what step in this process defines whether we'll do this or not? And then focus your energies on that step. Does that make sense?
Yep, completely. So, we're getting close on time here, Mike, and thank you again for joining with us and sharing your energy, especially too, and all your wisdom. You've spoken about the becoming a virtuoso. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Sure. Making the choice to become a virtuoso. It's something that back in the 90s, I had been playing colleges, and the late 90s. And I had been playing, and I was doing really well in just that niche market. And my friend and mentor, Brian Tracy, said, Mike, that's great. Have you resolved to be the best? Which I call making the choice to become a virtuoso. And he said, have you resolved to be the best? And I was kind of like, dude, I'm doing pretty well here. Dude, that's guitar player talk. And he said, dude, that's not what I asked you. He said, have you made the choice to become the personal best? And I thought about it, and the answer knocked me over, because the answer was no. Here I was, so many people are in the same position. Here I was doing what I feel like I've been put on the planet to do. And because it's working, I was coasting. Most adults are coasting. And here's the problem with coasting. It only happens downhill. So I made the choice. And so he basically gave me an exercise. I'll just give you guys this exercise. This works so well if you'll simply do it all the way. He said, take out a sheet of paper, write this question at the top. And at this point, he's got me, because he's nailed where I am in life and what I'm not doing right. So what would it take for me to become a virtuoso? And then a blank. What would it take for me to become a virtuoso? So for me, it would be, what would it take for me to become a virtuoso guitarist and comedian and professional speaker? What would I do to get there? See, the point here is that most of us understand the need, as you said in the beginning, for continuing education, getting better. Very few of us articulate a path with intentionality as to where we want to go, what it's going to take to get there. What would you do on a regular basis to become what it is you want to become? And so I did. I sat down and did it. So, what would it take for me to become a virtuoso leader? What would it take for me to become a virtuoso facilities manager? What would it take? Whatever it is. And so, I started doing it, and I ended up with a list of 11 things, and a lot of them are common. I would be reading regularly in my field, possibility thinking. That I would be listening to programs by others, educating myself. I practice on a regular basis. I would go to every presentation I could go to. I would get a mentor, someone who's done something similar to what I want to do, who's farther along, who's willing to pour into me. I would get regular coaching, which is different than mentor, because coaching is intentional and you usually pay for it. I do coaching, by the way. That's because I so believe it. I believe that you are a coach and you have a coach, and always. And so some of those would be common to anybody doing this. And the key there is this list. If you sit down to do this, most of us, it won't take more than 10 minutes. And the reason is we know what we need to do. Most of us know exactly what we need to do. We just don't do it. So it's simply becoming intentional. I came up with 11 things and I follow that. I think in 22 years, one thing changed just because a little bit change in my career. So that's what I talk about. And then I've developed a program called Virtuoso Global. And this is where I like to talk with people about what it takes to get from where you are to where you want to be, what it takes to become a master of what you do, what it takes to set that goal, to create that plan, the things that I've done for others in this Virtuoso system. And what I'll just offer this to any of your listeners, because we did this phone call. I offer to do a complimentary 30-minute strategy call. I call it a what if jumpstart. And I can give you the calendar. You can give you the Calendly link, and you can sign up, and I will talk with you for 30 minutes to do this, just to see. I want to hear what you want to do. I want to offer perspective and outside. I'm an artist, so I look at things differently. Outside perspective, maybe some possible next steps, and if it made sense for us to work together in some way beyond that, we could look at that too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, and thank you for that. And when we wrap, we'll give details on how people can get in touch with us, and so we can connect them with you to get that 30-minute what if jumpstart. Really do appreciate that. I hope everybody takes advantage of it and books up your Calendly. hope we make you eat your words there, Mike.
Well, it's all right, man. I dig this stuff, and it works. It's a powerful thing.
No, thank you. And I guess last thing, I guess we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you. Do you want to play out a little outro here for us as we go?
Sure. Well, you can go to my website. I would, if I had the chance, I would do something like you can go on my website. I like to finish with something like Bohemian Rhapsody, which I can do on just one guitar. Now we're good. But let me do this style. This is a what if question. What if you could play a guitar without strumming or picking fingers or this? Well, it's how I started. You just touch the string. And this works. I'm doing it on an acoustic guitar. I've got it amplified so you can hear it, but it works. I'll turn it off. You can still hear it. It still works. And the piece is called Quicksilver. It'll be short and to the point, but a lot of notes. So thank you, guys. Here we go. This is called, Quicksilver.